Are we live? We're live. Point and Click Productions. Wait a second. I can't call this Point and Click Productions. This is the whole studio we're in here. What am I supposed to do now?
I don't know. We still pointed and clicked.
Okay, we still pointed and clicked. Well, Portland Mindfulness Therapy and Joe Ryan Wine presents a conversation with Benjamin Wittes on the topic of the psychological impact of political events. Real cheery. I'm sure we'll have a good time. Now, Ben's an old friend of mine, but that's not all. Ben is a very important person. He is editor-in-chief of the Lawfare blog, and he is a Brookings Institution scholar. Several books and influential other publications, and has become something of a public figure in the past 5 years on a grander scale than previously. And I am privileged to have him here today with us to talk about things. I'm not used to having important people on this channel, so pardon me if I'm a little nervous and stumbling on my words. Well, Ben, let's get right into it. It's been a really interesting past 5 years for most of us, and I would say that's true. I dare say that's probably true all the way across the political spectrum. I myself have largely coped with this, as I have told you, and I have also probably mentioned at such time as some of those who may or may not be watching now or in the future, that I chose a strategy much like the proverbial ostrich of putting my head in the sand, not taking in any news in any form other than what my clients came and told me about. So I did this to help preserve my sanity. There are hundreds of millions of people in this country, and each one of them could probably tell a different story about how they coped with the past 5 years and all of its complexities. Now, with that, Ben, perhaps we might start with a question from me, since I don't see that anyone is watching just yet. Since I'm not that big a star, we might get one or two live, and I'll keep an eye on the chat there, and do feel free, if you're watching this, to enter a question or a comment in chat. Otherwise, we'll just rattle on for about 15-20 minutes. So, Ben, a real general question. Obviously, the political events of the past 5 years in the United States of America are too numerous and complex to possibly summarize in anything resembling a succinct fashion right at this moment. But they have included the election of Donald Trump, the events of the Trump administration, the events of January 6th, that occurred at the Capitol. Am I missing something of enormous importance in that summary?
No, I think actually a lot of the political events of the last 5-6 years can be summarized in the name Donald Trump, and that was an event that was both for his supporters and for his opponents energizing and highly stressful, and completely unlike anything that had happened before. And it started during his candidacy, and it continued during his presidency, and it did not end with his departure from office. And I think the evidence that was an unusual political period that may or may not be over is completely overwhelming.
Yeah, completely overwhelming. And I get a lot of questions. I get a lot of more than questions, real involvement from my clients. I don't know if I can get involvement from someone. My clients and I hash through this stuff a lot, Ben, as you might expect. I live in Portland, Oregon. It is largely, my clientele is largely very far on the liberal side, but not exclusively. And I've had people across the political spectrum. And as you said, and I think I said something like that before you, This has been a stressful period for everyone. I think it's been particularly stressful over in Portland, Oregon, but it's been stressful everywhere.
Well, I think it's been particularly stressful. Look, so there are particular stressors that exist in Portland that did not exist elsewhere, like sustained political violence and an actual shutdown of a fair bit of downtown Portland. That's on the other hand, look, there are some stressors that exist in Washington, D.C., where I live that don't exist anywhere else, like the absolute inability to shut down politics from your life. And, that is something that if you live in most places, you can do what you do here. But if you live in Washington, you actually can't do that because this is a company town. And there are stressors that, if you live in the vicinity of, one of the numerous Trump properties that he visits or visited when he was president, most famously Mar-a-Lago, but also Bedminster in New Jersey. There are stressors associated with that, like the Secret Service, blocking roads and stuff. And so I think that it plays out differently wherever you are. And look, it plays out differently for Trump supporters than it does for Trump opponents. And those of us who are not fans of the president and not, sympathetic to the Trump movement, I don't think should underestimate the stress that the Trump supporters are under. Imagine.
Now, you do realize you just call him the president.
The former president.
Okay, good. Yeah, because I was wondering if I was maybe just.
No, you're a little behind.
I missed something, the return of the son of.
But I mean, if you imagine if you honestly believed, and I think a lot of them do honestly believe, that your guy won the election and it was stolen from him by fraud, you would spend a huge amount of time being very angry and kind of pulling your hair out at what was stolen from you. And that's actually a very stressful way to live as well. And so, I think one of the things about a polarized political environment is that everybody genuinely thinks they are playing defense, but in fact, they may be playing offense. Yeah. And so, the things that you do that you think of that are in fact playing offense, you think you are doing preemptively to prevent the other side from, and that's a creature of an effective polarized environment in which, the performance of the act of polarization is very important.
Yeah, Ben, I'd like to go into that because that's one of the most painful things about this. And I live in Oregon, I live in Portland, Oregon, and this isn't so different from many states, but we have a liberal city surrounded by a pretty conservative countryside for many, 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 many miles in any direction you care to go. And so during part of the Trump administration, I was actually commuting once, twice a week. And then COVID came along to add to any number of stressors. We had the wildfires as well. It was really quite remarkable. But I was commuting for a little while out to Estacada, Oregon. And so I saw a little bit of both sides. And this is the part of this that perhaps is most painful, or one of the most painful parts, is that we are being torn apart as a country in a way that we haven't to this degree in my lifetime, not within my memory, having been born around when you were, in my case, 1970. And one of the things that, as a psychologist, comes to mind is some findings that aren't central to my expertise, but that I became familiarized with, that have to do with feuds and tit-for-tat conflicts, wherein actually, it's a researcher whose name I can't recall at the moment. I went to one of his presentations, and he cited research that showed that when people are in a conflict, in a prolonged conflict, they will, and let's see if I can say this in a way that's comprehensible, they will estimate the damage done. Let's say you're the enemy and I'm the good guy. I'm the hero, you're the villain. Let's just pretend. I will estimate that anything you do to me is 5 times as bad as how you estimate it was, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
So anything I do to you, you will, the findings suggest, tend to estimate that what I did to you was 5 times as bad as what you did to me.
So there's actually a very interesting corollary to that in the political science literature, which is that in highly polarized environments, what political scientists call affective polarization.
Was that effective?
Affective.
So emotional polarization.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In atmospheres of affective polarization, people don't even like their own side very much. They just hate the other side so much. So, like, if you think about this in your own life, it probably makes sense. People like in your world in Portland, they don't love the Democratic Party. They just hate the Republican Party. And among, Trump supporters, they really don't love the Republican Party. They just, it is the organ through which they fight the people they hate. And so it is actually a political atmosphere almost entirely driven by the exact sort of thing you're describing.
Yeah. And that part of how, wow, our representatives really suck. They are really not representing us adequately. But they're not people that I would actually like to kill with my bare hands. Whereas in many cases, the level of hatred I could interpolate that some individuals feel that way about the opposition representative.
Well, and if you think about it in terms of the literature that you just described, it's actually more pointed than that, right? Because one of the reasons we don't like our own people is that they're not as tough on the other people and the other side as we want them to be. And by the way, the other side believes exactly the same thing. And so and that creates enormous pressure on the political actors to be tougher than they might actually be inclined to be. Because there's a kind of one-way ratchet in which people psychologically are experiencing exactly what you just described. Every blow the other side strikes is 5 times as hard to me as it is to the people. And more importantly, when you hit me, it is perceived by me as 5 times as hard as when I hit you in exactly the same way is perceived by me, and vice versa.
So does that mean that there's a 25-to-1 difference?
No, because it's perceived, I'm perceiving the blow that I strike against you as 1/5 as strong as you are perceiving it. And we're both irritated at our own representatives for not hitting the other side hard
enough.
And so that creates a lot of pressure on the representatives to hit very, very hard.
Yeah. And the symmetry that you're describing now I have a side. I have a very, very clearly defined side. I have not hidden it on this channel. However, I like to think of myself as first a human being, maybe last a political animal, and being a therapist somewhere in between. So I'm troubled by some aspects of this symmetry and some aspects of this circularity and this seemingly impossible to escape from cycle, tit for tat sort of cycle, like the Hatfields and the Coys, or like the Montagues and Capulets and Romeo and Juliet. But I'm also struck as a psychologist and as something of a polytheoretical psychologist that this is very much an encounter with one's mirror, a kind of encounter with one's shadow, if you will, that everything I hate about myself is, I think, is true of the enemy out there, and everything that they hate about themselves they think is true about me. Is that going a little bit too psychological for your toolbox?
So I definitely think there is projection that's going on. I also don't want to describe the situation as perfectly symmetrical.
No.
Because I actually don't think the political parties, I think what we have right now is an extreme but basically asymmetric polarization.
Mhm.
That said, I do think that that the sense of the world as that there are aspects of symmetrical polarization in our world that people don't recognize as such because they're too interior to the system.
Yeah. I want to pick up further on this. Each time we cycle around, there's something that sticks out for me. And this idea of asymmetry kind of provokes some memories I have of, it's really hot in here. I'm turning redder and redder, and Ben
Well, we could turn on the air conditioning, but that would affect the sound of it. But let's
no
do
one
that.
No one would hear us. Well, maybe you'll hear us, and maybe it'll be a little bit loud, but we won't melt. We've just got a few more minutes. So when you talk about asymmetrical situations, it makes me think about, well, what many of us call terrorism. It makes me think about those who feel that they have no representation, those who feel that this is so asymmetrical that their only possible recourse is to that of violence because they don't feel represented at all. And play with that, if you would. I don't mean to go out on a dark note. Maybe we'll find something optimistic to pick out of this.
First of all, I don't think you have to go all the way to terrorism to go to political violence.
Okay.
Right? And political violence, we have seen in this cycle. We saw it on January 6th. We saw it, we've seen a lot of threats of it in other contexts. And so I don't think you don't need to go to terrorism, which involves, I don't know, in modern idioms, it involves sort of cells and planning and bombs and stuff.
There was a fair bit of planning involved on January 6th, I think.
Well, there was more than that. There were a lot of angry people gathered in the same place and storming the same building.
Okay.
And so I look, I don't want to diminish what happened on January 6th, but I mean, the fact that you talked about terrorism in a hypothetical context when we're only a few months after suggests that sort of intuitively this was something else. It was a kind of quasi-spontaneous insurrectionary activity that was violent and dangerous and, got a lot of people hurt. And got 500 people arrested. Look, I think you do have a lot of capacity for violence built into this environment. And the reason is threefold. One is that a lot of people have been led to believe things that are not true about their rights being taken away. And by the way, having your rights taken away is a good reason for violence. Right? That's the American Revolution. Right?
If, in fact, your rights have been taken away.
Yes.
And that's not delusional.
Well, right. So, leave aside the fact that it's delusional right now. We actually have, tens of millions of people who believe to one degree or another that their rights have been taken away.
That's an oy vey. That said, that might even get a full-blown oy vey is mir. Oh, woe is me in Yiddish.
It's a big problem.
It's a huge problem and terrifying.
But it's not the limits of the problem.
It's not. And since we have imposed limits on our own time, and since people come to me to some degree to feel just a little bit better about things, which I'll always dispute whether you really want to feel better or whether you want to feel more effectively. In other words, more effectively feel your feelings, yada, yada, yada. I'm going to look for an angle to go out on that has some modicum of hope. I have occasionally been accused of being too much of a poop disturber for someone who promotes himself as a mindfulness-based therapist. Why am I getting all political? Well, I have some really, really good arguments for that. I'm not going to present them right now. But there is a point that someone once made on my Facebook page that I have since deactivated since I didn't feel that was a very good forum. And he said, I don't come here for politics. And I said to myself, well, okay, maybe there's a point there. I'm going to just go with people come to me to try to get some perspective and feel, if not better in a pleasant sort of way, then at least feel more like the situation is something they can handle. So can we pull something from this that is, if not optimistic in the, I was going to say belladonna way. No, what's the right word? Not prima donna, not belladonna. Rose tinted glasses. Help me out here. Someone.
Look, I am not a pessimistic person about our political situation, and I don't actually mean to sound doom and gloom. I think the situation is improving very substantially. And look, I think if you're, no matter who you are in this country and what you believe, there are segments of government that meaningfully represent you. And
so for my viewers, maybe one point to pick out might be, since my viewers, I would say the vast majority of my viewers were not pleased to have Donald Trump as a president.
As was not I. And yet, so if you're one of those viewers, you got your ass kicked hard in 2016. You came roaring back in 2018, and you took away the presidency from him. An incumbent president losing an election in the United States is extremely rare. It hasn't happened since 1992, and it's not something that happens very often. And Donald Trump was not reelected. And by the way, the Senate switched parties too. Conversely, if you're a supporter of the former president, you actually control the state governments of most states to one degree or another. You have 6 justices on the Supreme Court who were appointed by, who are ideologically similar to what the president that you supported purported to want the court to look like. You have a quite good chance of taking back the House of Representatives in a year and a half. And so, the good news is that whoever you are not disenfranchised. You are not without ability to influence the system. And the pendulum modulates in ways that I don't always like, and I would rather, of course, that all power be concentrated in my hands. But but in acknowledging that other people at least claim to have equal status and dignity to my own. This is the way we share power in this country, and I actually think there's a lot of cause to take comfort in that modulation.
Yeah. So to extract from that, Donald Trump won the election. We Democrats, people left of center, hit back really, really hard and took back the presidency, as well as arguably both houses. One house for sure, the other house kind of sort of hemi-demi. On the other hand, Republicans still hold the majority of state legislatures and the majority of the Supreme Court.
Majority of governorships.
The majority of governorships. And if you're watching and you're a Trump supporter, or in any case on the GOP side, you're represented richly. You have great representation, as do we. And weirdly, Ben, I come out of this, you know me, I have a penchant for extreme statements, especially behind closed doors. And I was profoundly disappointed in my country. As a Jew, I was rather terrified by the appointment of Steve Bannon to, anything on the federal level, and so forth. And I come out of this period somewhat humbled by the fact that, I don't know, I think what you said is true. Two very, very divergent sides are both, in a sense, as angry as we are, actually objectively enjoying a great deal of representation and quite a tug of war back and forth on many, many levels in our extraordinary and insanely complex system of government.
Thank you, Jim Madison.
But I don't know what that is. But
no, James. I mean,
James.
He went by Jimmy.
Jimmy, you guys are on.
Actually,
Jimmy.
Jimmy.
Yeah, first name basis. Now, the word I was looking for earlier was Pollyanna. In case you think I was having a psychotic break talking about belladonna, I was saying that maybe I can't be a Pollyanna in terms of optimism, but perhaps we can have a realistic optimism, which is what I always hope for. Well, we have gone into extra innings and over our appointed time, and it was well worth it. I could easily spend another 25 to 60 minutes talking to my dear old friend Ben here, whom once again we are very honored to have on our tiny little humble homemade channel. So thank you, Ben, for your time.
Thanks for having me.
And I thank everyone who is watching, but in particular the probably many, many more people to come other than the two who were present at the time of the recording that will be watching this in the future. And it'll be interesting to play with some of these thoughts should my viewers wish to do so. That's all we have time for. And so I'm going to say something awkward and then reach for the stop button like I always do. Ben, thank you.